This is Drew Hill, and today we're going to look at the four teams that can win March Madness this year. There are a lot of different things that you can look at when you're filling out your bracket, but obviously the most important is to get the champion right, as that is worth the most points in most bracket contests. So there are a lot of different criteria people look at, ratings and things like that. But here are some different categories, and we're just looking for the teams that fit into all or most of these. So the first couple are actually kind of random ones that would seem like they shouldn't have that much of an effect. They're kind of trivial seeming, but they're actually more accurate than going strictly by ratings cutoffs or anything like that. First one is the Week 6 AP Top 25, the top 12 teams in that. Every champion except for Syracuse in 2003, and I think the last 40 years, has been in the top 12 of the 2006 AP Top 25. Why is that the case? Not sure why that particular week is the key week, but I think it could be because it blends preseason expectations with some early results. And so the 12 teams we have there are Tennessee, Auburn, Iowa State, Duke, Kentucky, Marquette, Alabama, Gonzaga, Florida, Kansas, Purdue, and Oregon. So notable teams left out, Houston, St. John's, Michigan State, Texas Tech, and Maryland, all top 5-seeded teams that did not appear in that list. Another one that's actually even stronger than that, as in it's been true for every champion since 1993, is that teams have to make the semifinals of their conference tournament. Caveat with that is conferences haven't always been as big as they are now, and so with the size of the conferences, that would add extra rounds potentially to a team's trip. So this is actually something that could get broken in the near future. But if something has happened for over 30 years in a row, I'm not going to doubt it. So if we use that to narrow down from our list of 12, teams that appeared in the top 12 that did not make their conference semifinals include Iowa State, Kentucky, Kansas, Purdue, and Oregon. So we have 7 teams that did. That was Tennessee, Auburn, Duke, Marquette, Alabama, Gonzaga, and Florida. One other interesting trend I've noticed that has been true for several of the last NCAA champions every year since the 2014 UConn team is that every champion is ranked in the top 13 in scoring margin per game. The caveat with that is I think that includes the NCAA tournament in its ranking. So obviously if a team is the only one that did not lose in the NCAA tournament, has those extra games to build up that scoring margin potentially. For example, UConn the last 2 years blew out everybody in their path. That's just a caveat here, but interesting thing with that is the top 13 teams in scoring margin are Duke, Gonzaga, Florida, Houston, UC San Diego, Maryland, Auburn, VCU, Texas Tech, St. John's, Iowa State, and St. Mary's. Teams that appeared in the 2 previous categories include Duke, Gonzaga, Florida, Auburn, and Tennessee. As I mentioned, St. John's was a notable exception to the first, did appear in the second. They are in this. Iowa State was in the first, not the second. They are in this list. Houston in the second, not the first. Same with Maryland and Texas Tech. And then the most popular one, I think, is using the KenPom adjusted offensive efficiency ratings. Most of the champions have appeared in the top 20 in both offense and defense. So it's hard to win a championship if you're only good at defense, but you don't score as well. Same thing with offense. If you can't stop anybody, you're not as likely to win the championship. So looking at the top teams that appear in the top 10 in offensive rating and defensive rating on KenPom include Duke, Florida, and Houston. Auburn just outside the top 10 on defense at 12. So they are the first of a list of top 20 in both, which also includes Tennessee and Iowa State. There have been a few exceptions that can drop it all the way down to the low 30s. So just expanding that, there's also, with teams that are in the top 40 in both, we have Alabama, Texas Tech, Gonzaga, Arizona, Wisconsin, Clemson, Michigan State, Maryland, Louisville, Ole Miss, Marquette, UCLA, and Oregon. 2 teams that were just barely off the cutoff were VCU and Illinois, 1 spot off on one of the 2 ratings. The teams that appear in the top 20 and appear in the other 3 categories are Duke, Florida, Auburn, and Tennessee. Obviously, Duke, Florida, and Auburn aren't that surprising. They're the biggest favorites right now. Tennessee's a little bit surprising. I haven't quite decided who I think is the most likely of those 4 to win. For a while, I was kind of looking at Florida. I do worry that Florida is getting all the hype right now, and they're going to disappoint. And the 4th 1 seed has had struggles in the last few years. Since 2020, none of the 4th 1 seeds have made the Final Four. Duke is the most popular pick, and I don't always like to pick the most popular pick just because it's not as valuable for your bracket. Obviously, UConn won it all last year, so can be wise. The main point is to get it right. Auburn's the overall 1 seed. I normally don't like to pick overall 1 seeds, but it feels like they're actually a very valuable pick right now just because they have some losses recently, and so they're not going to be as popular as Florida and Duke. One other factor that often gets included when discussing potential champions is the level of NBA talent. Every NCAA champion of the last 40 years has had at least one top 30 pick, and all but one have had at least one first round pick. One would be first round today, but at the time there weren't as many NBA teams, so was not a first round pick. Duke would have the advantage here with loads of first round picks, including at least 3 projected in and around the top 10. But Auburn, Janai Broome could be a projected first rounder, and especially you often see an NCAA champion get their players boosted because they won. Florida has a couple guys projected in the second round, so they could potentially move up with an NCAA championship as well. So it doesn't necessarily disqualify any of them. It might give you more of an inclination to pick Duke. But that is just something else to consider. One other trend I noticed that actually got broken last year, so this is a very, very flaky trend, but the previous 5 NCAA champions before last year had lost in the first or second round the year previous. So that was 2018 Villanova, 2019 Virginia, 2021 Baylor, 2022 Kansas, and 2023 UConn. Obviously, it was broken last year, and that's only 5 out of the last 6, so not nearly as strong as some of the other streaks I've mentioned. But just in case that does prove to be a factor in your pick, just know that Auburn and Florida both lost in the first round last year, while Duke and Tennessee made the Elite Eight. So that might potentially sway you towards Auburn or Florida, or maybe not, because like I said, it's a very flaky trend. One other team that does fit all of the categories, if you expand it to the top 40, is Gonzaga, which makes them an interesting team because they're only an 8 seed, so very unlikely to win the championship. The lowest seed ever to win the championship was an 8 seed. There's a reason it does not happen that often, but if you really want to pick a dark horse, you think Gonzaga is this year's 2014 UConn, who won it as a 7 seed, they might be the pick for you. They get to match up with Houston in the second round if both teams win, so that's a huge matchup with a lot at stake. The 2 teams with the longest active Sweet 16 streaks. But my guess is it's going to be one of the 4 that I mentioned. Which one, I guess we'll wait and see. So hopefully this helps you when you're creating your March Madness bracket. And I'll probably release a video with my overall NCAA bracket picks and things I'm looking at later. I just wanted to release this one of the champion first, give you a little bit of a teaser for that.